And welcome to the National Motor Museum of Beaulieu. In November, we trialled our first virtual event of this type to engage with our members who are unable to participate in our live program during these strange times. And tonight, we'd like to welcome our Friends members, along with Friends Secretary Teresa Browning, who's joining us in the virtual audience tonight. We extend a heartfelt thank you to every one of you for your continued support at this time. In particular, David Bond at Footman James, who sponsors our startup area, which sadly has not been able to start this year. Also, to say thank you to our camera woman tonight, who is Doug's wife, Rachel Hill, and thank them both for their time tonight. The order of the evening will be as follows. Doug Hill, our museum manager and chief engineer, will spend half an hour telling us about the Auburn. And in the last half hour, Russell Bowman, our CEO, will put as many of your questions to Doug. Finally, we'll end up with a few words from Mary Montague Scott, who will share her memories of the Auburn before we bid you good night. Lastly, at the bottom of your screen or on the side of your screen, you'll see there are buttons where you'll be able to find the question and answer in the chat button. That's where Russell will be able to take your answers or your questions, and we will then relay these to Doug. There's a pretty large audience. I hope we can manage to do that. And I hope you enjoy this evening.
So good evening and welcome to another one of the Hills Angels, a sort of look under the bonnet, under the car. And we're talking tonight about this magnificent Art Deco Auburn 851 Speedster of 1935. Before I continue, I'd just like to dedicate this evening to one of my museum guides, attendants, living history presenters, Paul Dern, who sadly passed away suddenly at the age of 57 a week ago today. So I'm dedicating this to Paul tonight. So here we have 1.7 tons of American style. It wouldn't be the same unless it had white wall tires, would it? We did have it on black tires, but it just didn't look the same, you know. Anyway, Auburn 851 Speedster. Now, Auburn was a famous American make, and Auburn motor cars were taken over by Cord, Eric Lobb and Cord, in 1926. So when this car was built, Cord had actually owned Auburn for 9 years. And Auburn were just about folding up as a company. And the 851 Speedster and the 852 were the last part of the last gasps of the Auburn Motor Company. The 852, a very, very similar car, if not the same, and I don't know what those subtle differences were. I think it's something to do with the bumper or something. As I say, 1.7 tons. Supercharged, it says in excellence along here, and supercharged is because the engine is not normally aspirated, it is a compressor engine. They built 3,316 of the 851 Speedsters, and there probably less than 20 of them were right-hand drive. This car was purchased in the 60s by Edward Lord Montague and Mr. Pollock of Vintage Tire Supplies. And the car was originally black. It was then restored and painted in Lyndhurst in a magnificent Old English white. And subsequently, it's been re-restored and it has this lovely, beautiful, creamy white. It is a form of Old English white. Magnificent color for the car, especially, as I say, with the white wall tires. And we will go around the car and we'll have a look at it. So this is an undersquare engine, okay? So this has got a 3-inch bore with a 4 3/4-inch stroke. So it's a long Loropy engine, 8-cylinder, 4.5 litre, revs to about 5,000 revs. It produces about 270 foot-pound of torque at 4,000 revs. It does over 100 miles an hour, and I can prove that tonight. There's not enough room in the museum, so I won't be hurtling down the museum, but I've got something that will prove that to you. And it has the fuel consumption of 12 miles to the gallon. and it just happily cruises at 85 miles an hour even today. So it is excellent. It is said that the Auburn was one of the first cars as standard, the 851 Speedster, to have a radio, and this indeed has a working valve radio in it as well. The trouble is, if you turn the radio on with headlights on, the headlights are pretty bad as it is, and they dim right down, and the dynamo gets hot and everything. It draws so much current, it almost takes up half the engine power, I think, just to run the radio. But anyway, as I say, a great, lovely, fast touring car. And indeed, in 2007, I was very privileged to drive this car from Shanghai to Beijing. And yes, we did go through Wuhan. One of the good things to come out of Wuhan was this. So this is, as I say, a great car. I actually took it through the Alps as well. It's not the car for the Alps. It's a bit like trying to drive a boat. Big tires. The suspension is actually quite firm. And if you look at the chassis, it's built like a bit like a truck. The electrical system on the car is 6 volts. And so the lights are more for being seen than seeing with. And now they make some pretty good LED 6-volt bulbs that hopefully, if ever we have to take this car out in the dark again, we will go to LED bulbs just for safety reasons. And the headlights, Rachel, if you'd like to come a bit closer to the headlights, to change the bulb, the headlight is actually spun steel. And you have to push the headlight glass in and tilt it and spring it out. And that is really a hairy job. I really don't want to even demonstrate that. We have all sorts of bubble wrap and everything on the floor if we have to change a bulb with it. Now, as I say, Auburn were in the last gasps as a company in 1935. And the build quality of the body, particularly the woodwork underneath, actually reflects that. It fits where it touches. And when we took the body off this car, we were reassembling the car and we did up the nuts and the bolts on the offside rear wing, and we found that the driver's door sprung open. That's how much it sort of was twisting. Then we spoke to someone in America who was rebuilding one of these, and we said about trying to get it all jigged and get the body line. And he said, have you tightened the body down to the chassis on felt pads? We said, yes, we have. He said, right, loosen all the bolts. Don't have it tight, have it wobbling about a bit, because that's the only way it will settle down. And that's exactly what we did. And then after a few hundred miles, just nipped things up. But you can actually see, if you look, that, for example, if you look from the front there, Rachel, you'll see one headlight is closer to what's called the front clip than the other. And things like that will show. Now, whilst we're at the front of the car, I want to tell you a little tale. I was in Reims in France, and with the car, we'd actually just done the opening of Euro Disney with it, and had to park the car in an underground car park. But as you look along the car, it's actually 9.5 inches wider at the back than it is at the front. And I went down into an underground car park. I went round a corner, and that was me stuck. The bumper went past a post, and the post sprung in and hooked by the wheel, and I managed to stop without doing any damage. The only way I could get the car out of that predicament was to take the bumper off. So there's two big nuts here, one big nut behind the steering wheel, I've got to say, but two big nuts here, and took the steering wheel, took the bumper off, and then I had to reverse out of the inn in a French underground car park. And the French, I've got to say, and I apologize, but perhaps in that scenario weren't the most patient of people. And yeah, it was quite colorful for a while. So BXY 525, this is the car that Edward Lord Montague bought, as I say, with Eric Pollard, and we believe that they were the second owners of the car. We thought when we got this car that it was once owned by Milena Dietrich. But we researched it when we were restoring the car, and there's several things that proved to us, sadly, that it wasn't. Now, it could have been driven by Marlene Dietrich, but certainly not owned by her. The car that was driven and owned by Marlene Dietrich in the film Desiree was black. It had a spare wheel mounted right on the tail on the outside of the car, which actually ruins the look of the car. It was left-hand drive, and there's no way that this car ever was left-hand drive. So we can then talk about the history of the car. And one thing that one guide said to me, which horrified me once, he said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Well, sadly, the truth is that this wasn't Marlene Dietrich's car. Now, if we'd like to come down here, and I'm going to open the bonnet and show you the business part of the car. And it's sitting quite low in there. This is a very tall engine, although it's sitting low in the chassis. And this is a straight 8-cylinder, as I say, 4.5 litre. And this bit here is the supercharger. Now, this supercharger is a supercharger built by Schweitzer and Cummins, and it is a centrifugal blower that is geared up via a bevel drive from the timing gears. And I think it's 4-to-1. It could be 6-to-1, but I believe it's 4-to-1. But when you hit just over 4,000 revs, the engine makes a mechanical tinkling noise. And that noise is the tips of the centrifugal blower actually going supersonic. So we have been told, and it is quite a common thing with this. So you hear this mechanical tinkling. And you see this lovely stylistic on the exhaust pipe here. This is a covering over a solid pipe, okay? But it's all about style, this car, as you swoop down, as you look down the car. I will close the bonnet again because, by the way, it seems quite a small carburettor to suck all of that fuel through, 12 miles to the gallon, hooning through there. It compresses to about, I think it's 4 pounds per square inch. You have to tweak the bonnet a little bit to close it down. And I just want to shut this just so it doesn't spoil the line of the car. Now, Auburn had air conditioning. Well, sort of. I'll just open the door, suicide door as they call them, opening this way. And we go down here. That's the passenger's air conditioning. And we go around, and similarly, we have the driver's air conditioning. It does sort of put a bit of a draft on your knees. Let's put it that way. Now, one of the things about this car is it has 6 forward gears, typically American of the period, 12-volt electric, and a 3-speed gearbox, but it has a 2-speed rear axle. And it's called a Columbia dual ratio rear axle. And it's a very ingenious device, almost as ingenious in the fact that when you change the rear axle ratio, you mess up the ratio of the speedometer. But there is a compensator in the drive for the speedometer for when you change the axle ratio, so you keep the same speed, the right speed on your speedometer. And if you'd like to come over to here, just by to the side of the car, I'd like to show you the Epicyclic. This is out of the car at the moment. And here we have the Epicyclic gear train. That's the differential unit and the Epicyclic gears. I would suggest you go on YouTube and look to see how Epicyclic gears go. But by locking the outer ring, which carries the differential unit, you change the ratio of the gears going out through. And if it's an odd number of gears, it goes the same way. If it's an even number, it goes the opposite way. So there's all sorts of things and bits that lock on, and it works off a vacuum. The reason we got that out is the year before last, I went to Italy with the car, and sadly, whilst exiting a péage, that's what happened to the pinion gear. When you think that this car cruised quite happily across China, has been through the Alps, etc., etc., it's a really sad thing to happen. Now, we discovered in the oil at the bottom of the back axle casing 2 very stained old pinion teeth, and it had been weak for a long time. So here we have the new unit all ready to go in that we've had made for the car. So this is all ready to go in, and once we get over lockdown and we get people back, etc., etc., this will be one of the tasks. Now I want to show off a little bit. I was going to show you an original Auburn owner's manual, but now I've got oil on my hands, so I'm not going to touch that. But that's what we have in the library. But I just want to show you, if I hold it vertically, I don't think we get any glare. This is the car in Shanghai, just at the start of the event. And it was #1 car of the rally, and it was made star of the show. And indeed, it's one of the few cars that looks good with the hood up. Now, if you look down the Auburn now, it has this wonderful design feature where it looks fast standing still. And there's not many cars that actually do that. And if we'd like to come down along here and look inside the car, I want to prove to you, I'm going to open the door for Rachel, and I'm going to go around the other side, and we'll go along the instruments. And I'm going to jump in here. Now, Rachel, if you'd like to look at the dashboard, you'll see a plaque there. It says, "This certifies that this Auburn automobile has been driven at 100.6 miles an hour before shipment. Ab Jenkins." Ab Jenkins was a famous race car driver and a record driver of the period. And every single Auburn 851 that was sold was driven at over 100 miles an hour. So would you let a racing car driver take your car out for a blast just before you got your new car? Pose the question. If we look to the left of that plaque, you will see the control for the valve radio. And then moving along, we have the clock and a cigar lighter. We could have restored the instruments when we did the car, but we felt that they were looking quite original, and it would take away the look of the car. This is the starter button here. We have the lighting switch, 1 click for side lights, 2 clicks for headlights. Gas, that is a hand throttle. Choke is quite self-explanatory. The rev counter, speedometer, and this is the instrument light switch. Now, also, I'd like to show you a feature. On modern cars, if you pull up at a set of lights, and you pull up, it cuts the engine. Well, you didn't want that to happen, really, back in the early days. And what this has is 3 positions on the ignition switch. That is ignition on and ordinary motoring. Off, and STX is StartX. And in that position, if the senses that the dynamo is not turning and generating a small current, it will automatically kick in the starter motor. And so StartX was a way of keeping the engine running if you had the hand throttle, the gas set too low, and it would stop. It would stop the car. Wonderful leather, big floppy door pockets, and a key, an original Auburn key. Now that is not the ignition key. I will show you what that does in a second. Under the flap here, Indeed, that's one of the functions of this key. This opens where the hood comes out, and it is the worst hood I've ever come across. What you don't want to be doing in this car is be stuck in a rain shower. With a blower Bentley, you can pull over to the side of the road and put it up in under a minute. But this will take you 2 strong men, 15 minutes, and by the time you've finished, you've got skinned knuckles and a bad attitude. It is really, really a horrible hood to put up. And this wonderful long sweeping boat tail. Now, all there is in the back of here is a spare wheel. The spare wheel sits on top of the axle. The fuel tank is slung in the rear member of the chassis. And if we come around here, there's little wonderful stylistic bumpers. Should I call them bumpers? Fenders. Or are these the fenders? These are the fenders. Anyway, if you come and have a look at this tail light, it has a clear panel in to illuminate the number plate, which is a wonderful thing. And then we come round to this side of the car to where I was standing when we first started. And in here is your boot space. It looks like there's an old t-shirt, but it's a box of spares in here at the moment. But in there, that is where you kept your golf clubs. And that's all the luggage space you had. You can see, if you go that way with the camera a little bit, you can see the spare wheel sitting in there. So a great big car with very little room. So these cars, funnily enough, about 10 years ago, I say only, it's all relevant, but this car 10 years ago was worth maybe £200,000. One last year, a restored one in similar condition to this, sold for $1.4 million. So I think people are realizing the style of the car. The engine in this car, as I mentioned, was 4.5 litres, but is built by Lycoming the aero engineers. And Eric Lobencord actually owned Lycoming at the time. Now, when I was in China with this, we actually got stuck in a typhoon. And there was a letter that came to each room of the hotel, all of us Brits, and said, we recommend you do not leave the hotel because of this typhoon. We checked with the local police and they said, well, look, we'll escort you. Everything should be okay. And we drove off out of the hotel in a typhoon. We didn't realize quite what it meant. We started to worry when we noticed the palm trees were being held up with poles and things to stop them being knocked over. And then the manhole covers being blown out the road and jets of water coming up. And this car went onto 5 cylinders because the first 3 cylinders, the water was driving through the radiator so hard that it was shorting the plugs out. But with the air intake right up where I told you, and with the exhaust sticking out of the back, we managed to go through 2 foot of water with no trouble at all. So faults with the car: big, wallowy, wider at the front, at the rear than it is at the front. It is great on the open highways, great on the freeway, as it were, just hooning down the road and cruising quite happily at 85 miles an hour. Sorry, 70 miles an hour, officer. Vacuum wipers. So when you put your foot down on the wipers, on the accelerator to go past something, the wipers slow down and almost stop. With the hood up, the visibility is really poor. And I am going to get in the car and I want to show you one other fault that it has. Here I am. I have no idea where that front corner of the car is. I'm sitting quite comfortably. I'm 5'10", 5'10.5", 5'11" on a good day, and it really is difficult. With the hood up, you're just about peering. So you've got to have your wits about you. We restored this car maybe 10 years ago. And it's tribute to my guys, the restoration and how we look after cars looking so magnificent now. It has gone to a show in Germany, to Schlossdick, the Concours d'Elegance, and won the Art of Car Style Award. You can see, I mean, it just looks magnificent. And it is just a wonderful thing, you know, just a lovely, sweeping, beautiful car. So there we are. I mean, this is Hills Angels. I've driven it a lot. I've done quite a few thousand miles in it. It cruises really nicely. Of course, it's not my favorite car, but it is certainly a great cruising car and lovely, lovely old car to drive. Oh, and the brakes are really quite good, which is good for 1.7 tons that does over 100 miles an hour. So I'll go over now to Russell for him to field any questions from you, and I hope that I can answer. If I can't answer, I'm not going to make it up. I will find out for you. So thank you very much indeed for the attention on that part, and over to any questions, I believe.
Good. Thank you, Doug. That was excellent. I'm sure everyone enjoyed that. I've had several questions coming in, which I will relay to you. Start, I think, with a question that came in immediately. You showed us in the Golf storage, a question I thought about, but Mary Montague Scott and Jonathan Holmes both asked the question. I was thinking, how do you get the wheel out if you need to change a tire? Or
well, if you'd like to come round this side and I open the door, in answer to the question is you take the seat out, the whole both parts of the seat comes out, and you have to drag the spare wheel. Oh, and you have to get that really horrible hood out, and then you have to drag the spare wheel out through the car. Not to be done in your white tuxedo.
No, absolutely. It'd be almost fun to fake a breakdown and call the RAC or AA to see if they can work that out for themselves, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it wouldn't be enough. Pick an AA man you didn't like, yeah.
Question from Jamie. Where did you have the new pinion made? He says it looks like a really good job. Where did you get that made?
That was made up near Chateau Impney, up near Droitwich, and I think it's CMC Gears. But if you want to email me, doug.hill@bewley.co.uk, I can give you the details of the people who made that for us.
Okay, and an interesting comment here from Dave Robinson. He says his late father had one quite like this in the 50s, but with a dicky seat. They were just considered an old car at that time, had a habit of oiling its plugs, especially in traffic. One day he was taking his mother-in-law to see the Christmas lights in London. The plugs oiled and he conked out in Trafalgar Square. A passing bus driver leant out of his cab and offered Dad a box of matches.
Yeah, well, these cars were in the 50s weren't worth very much. In fact, I've seen motorsport of, I think it's 1957, where you could buy a blower Bentley for £235. So it'd be nice to have a time machine.
So you were saying it's really good for obviously cruising at, when you said 85, you meant kilometers per hour, obviously.
Yes, officer.
And but so it wouldn't really be very good possibly for where you tend to see it really in images and things, cruising down Ocean Drive in Miami or somewhere in Hollywood with a celebrity in it. That maybe wouldn't be particularly pleasant driving then, Doug. Well,
this car actually, with its dual speed rear axle, is very tractable in traffic as well, and it does manage. The steering, once a car is rolling, is remarkably light. The steering box on the Auburn's is a very, very weak spot on the car. We've rebuilt this one. It's got some really bad design features in, which I hope we've got over. But yeah, it can be in the lower ratios. You can actually cruise quite gently. I would say that the clutch is a bit juddery if you've got a lot of traffic. But I was queuing for 2.5 hours on the ring road outside Beijing. It was 28 degrees and the car didn't even show any sign of boiling. And so, you know, it's a very de-stressed engine if you drive it properly.
So it sounds like it's really fine, but you probably need to steer clear of France then, Doug. You seem to have problems with French parking and péages, each of which cause you problems.
Yeah, the péage was in Italy, but yeah, I think there's a bit of a theme going there. But yes, it's not the car to maneuver in tight car parks or on steep slopes or anything. And if you go down to the lower range, you're putting an awful lot of strain, a big car on a very small pinion. And with all of the gubbins which are inside that rear axle, it's not a good result. There's a lot of car as well. We had a problem with this. This car absorbs an awful lot of heat, and similarly an awful lot of cold as well. And when you're with it in hot climates, you find the car will expand and doors will get tight and things like this. And when you drive it, actually, it's got a nasty habit of giving you a nip. If you're driving it with your arm out, and you go over a big bump, it'll give you a nasty blood blister under your arm. But the body moves, and sometimes you think, oh my God, I can't get the bonnet open because it's expanded and contracted. And we had actually exhibited this car at Retromobile in Paris in February, and it came back on a truck, and it was snowing when it came back, and it stopped snowing, and it came to us, and it was -7 outside. We brought it into the museum, we put it on the lift, and then we just left it there, and we heard a crackling noise and then a tinkling noise, and we wondered, what's that? You know, looking around and thinking someone dropped a plate or something like this. And we looked, and there were big chunks of white paint falling off, the size of your hand, just shattered. Paintwork on the car shattered, with the temperature difference, the expansion and contraction of the bodywork. And we found that when it was repainted, it hadn't been etch primed. The paint hadn't been etch primed, so it didn't key to the metal. And it was coming off in chunks. And it wasn't just leaving chunks of undercoat wire, it was leaving chunks of bare metal. So that was the main motivation then for us to rebuild the car. We had done an engine rebuild on it prior to that. But we were very fortunate also with an organization called the Dual Events, which Lord Montague is president of, and Edward Lord Montague was as well. They did a fundraising dinner for this some 10 years prior to that and raised funds for the repaint, and we hadn't spent that. So we had some money in the bank ready for the repaint anyway. So that was quite a result, but that did actually spur us into restoring the whole car, which was, as you can see, was a mammoth task.
Yes, thank you. And actually, Gary and Kay Crouch were asking, how long did all the restoration work on it take?
About 3 years. But what you have to understand is, in our restoration shop, we look after the entire collection, and also the monorail and the bus and the vehicles used for living history, and the door handle that's broken off down Palace House that needs silver soldering up and things like that. So we're doing all sorts of things like this. But yeah, the restoration took about 3 years.
Thank you. So technical question from Mike Webster. Is the 3-speed gearbox also epicyclic?
No, hello, Mike. No, it's not. It is a straight cut gearbox. Actually, straight cut gearbox, I lie. It has got synchromesh on second and third. It doesn't on first. But it is just quite a small gearbox, but quite robust, but a standard gearbox.
And just so everyone knows, Doug will be giving a 2-hour lecture on Epicyclic gears on Facebook immediately after this session.
Absolutely, and Russell is going to provide all of the bits for me to turn and show, etc., etc., so I can then demonstrate how an epicyclic gearbox works.
Excellent.
Yes.
You can rely upon me, Doug. No problem at all.
Well, I must say that just prior to coming on air, as it were, I did get my fundamentals of motor vehicle technology books out, just to refresh my mind on the workings of an epicyclic gearbox, and I thought, yeah, it is just as mind-boggling as I remember it.
So we have a couple of questions from Mike Timmins, actually, an interesting comment. And I think he's probably right when he says probably the only thing the Auburn has in common with a Frog Eye is its spare wheel also has to be hauled through the passenger compartment. So there we are. His question was, obviously it's got a UK plate on it at the moment. Was the car originally registered in the UK? Has it always had the same registration number?
Yes, this car was actually brought into the UK as BXY 525, and it was imported via Brooklands via a company that was an import company that was owned by Malcolm Campbell. And if you go to the Brooklands Museum, you will see the Campbell shed with the Auburn logo on the outside. He was the importer of Auburn motor cars. We believe it came into Scotland, and also Milena Dietrich was in Scotland at the time promoting her film. And so there is a real strong chance, although we can't find anything yet, that the car, there's a rumor that the car was actually driven by her up to a theatre where her film was showing. Yeah, it never was her car, and yes, it's always been UK registered. And as I say, one of the handful of right-hand drive 851s there are.
Thank you. And another question from Mike Timmins was, do you know, I mean, obviously you're talking about Cord and Auburn being co-owned, as it were. It's an interesting thing. Were there models you would say of Cord that were very similar to this and going after the same market at the time?
Cord actually employed the same designers, and so you will see styles of the Auburn stylistic look on some of the chords and the coffin note chords and things like this, and you will see some of the stylistic features. So there is a crossover between the two, yeah, you can tell that on the later Auburns, or indeed on the chords, the elements of the being owned and being designed by the same people.
Thank you. So Mike Webster's still on the gearboxes. Are the 2 gear sticks?
No. And Rachel, if you'd like to come here, I will show you. I'll go the other side and show you the center of the steering wheel. And this is the dual ratio rear axle, and that is how you change the ratio in the rear axle. And once you've gone into low or gone into high range, it doesn't change until you depress the clutch, and that opens a valve and creates a vacuum that vacuum then brings some bellows, brings in the lever, brings in the dog clutch, chucks in another gear, and that's what starts making the epicyclic work. And no, I'm not going to explain it right now.
No, because obviously we wouldn't want to steal your thunder for the 2-hour lecture.
Well, no, I mean, yes, Professor Doug on the epicyclic gear. Indeed, our coach painter Russell Bampton from Southampton, he used to call them epileptic gears, and I think it's quite a good description.
Yeah, absolutely. David Shaw was asking partway through, like to hear a bit more about the China trip. You said a couple of things about it. Would you say a little bit more? How did the car get transported out there? What was the sort of route that you were doing on that particular tour?
Okay, so what we did was the car was of course containered along with lots of other cars. I think there was 30 cars on the event. This was in a container with a Bentley Continental R, magnificent car. And yes, it was taken over to Shanghai, and the organizers employed a guy who a Brit, to go over and unload all of our cars for us. A guy called Jay Bullock, and we then turned up in Shanghai, and we got our cars from the sports stadium in Shanghai, and then we drove them from there to the hotel. This was the year prior to the Olympics, so they thought that the Chinese thought this was going to be a wonderful idea for us to turn up with these cars and go to a lot of the new, very, very top hotels. So new were they that when you turned on the taps, bits of plastic and stuff were coming out, etc. Doors weren't on and things like this. But we went from Shanghai, we went inland and across to Wuhan, and we did this dogleg. I hope lighting's still okay. It's just the time has knocked one set of lights out, by the way, in the museum. But I can turn them back on in a little bit. But anyway, so we went across to Wuhan, and basically from there we went north, northeast actually, and we headed up through the coal mining area, the edge of the mountains of inner China, and went up to Beijing. It was about 2,500 miles. But I've got to say that some of the pollution levels that we drove through, especially when we were going through the coal mining areas, there were hills that were shrouded in mist, we thought, but it wasn't. They were underground coal fires that were burning. So they reckoned they'd be burning for another 400 years. So we didn't hang around there too long. And we just proceeded along. We had backup. We had a few. It was very, very difficult rally for the organizers because the departments in China were squabbling amongst themselves. That either if you drove into one department in China and you upset one bunch of people, and you drove out and upset another one. We didn't. We were oblivious to this. We were just blundering through. But very, very enlightening. One interesting thing, though, is you drive down the motorways in China, you think, my God, what on earth's happening? The motorways turned green. And what the locals were doing was they were laying rice out across the motorway. And as the trucks and these cars came past, save them beating it on and getting the rice out of the plants, they follow up and lift them and sweep up after us. And the trucks and the cars were actually knocking the rice out of the plants. So that was quite enlightening.
What with the general pollution and the fact that they were preparing their rice by having cars and lorries driving over it, it doesn't sound wonderful.
There were parts where it was not nice at all. In fact, it was quite acrid, and you paid extra in the hotel to go to have rooms in the top. That wasn't because you had a penthouse view, but your room was above the smoke layer. So yeah, it was. But some of the hotels were absolutely fabulous, and the Chinese people were so pleased to see us, so welcoming. You know, as I say, we were a bit of a practice for that for the Olympics for them.
Mm. And I mean, actually, interesting question from Jonathan Holmes, who's saying, how much fuel does the tank hold? And I suppose a connected question is how did you do for fuel across China?
Okay, so they do have an awful lot of motor cars and a lot of filling stations. We were pouring the fuel through filters just to double check it, but it depended where you went, that whether you had it actually delivered via a pump or actually poured into a pail, which you had to then pour into the car yourself. But this has a range of about 180 miles on a tank full of fuel. So it was okay. There was a couple of times we were getting a little bit worried, but we were lucky that we had backup if we had run out of fuel. But most towns it was readily available. The quality of the fuel was good as well. So when I went to India with the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, then that was an entirely different scenario. But yeah, fuel was okay. One funny thing though, the suicide doors, as you saw, they swung open as you get in, and I drove past the fuel pump and I opened the door to back up to where the filler was, and I didn't realize that my mobile phone had fallen out of my pocket, and I ran over it with the front wheel. So that was the end of my communication with the Western world for the rest of that event, because I ran over my own phone.
Yes, not perfect. So I think we've come to the end of the questions. Lots of comments saying thank you very much for a fascinating and excellent talk, Doug. That's really, really good. And finally, we're going to finish by going to Mary Montague Scott, who has some personal recollections of this vehicle. So I'll thank Doug very much for his talk. And as the lights have gone out in the museum, you can go and put a 50p in the meter. And
yes, I will.
I'll hand over to Mary for her thoughts.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your attention, and be safe. And we'll see you soon. Hopefully, we'll talk about motorbikes next time. Okay, so thank you all, and good night.
Thanks, Doug.
Well, that was absolutely superb. I really, really loved hearing Doug's brilliant talk on the Auburn, and it's brought it all back to me. I went on a rally in the Auburn in 1991 with my father, and I'd been trained up from an early age to be driving these cars, as I did my first London to Brighton when I was only 17 years old in the De Dion. And lucky me, I took a film crew with me just to put a bit more pressure on the whole thing. But so by 1991, I was an old hand at rallies, and I was incredibly lucky because my father had been invited to go on a rally in northern France around the Loire Valley by a very good friend of his called Marquis de Gaulain. And they wanted to put a FIFA rally of Grand Marque cars together. They wanted to have 100 cars on the rally, but in fact, there were 71 in total. And in September 1991, my father went in the Alpine Eagle in the Rolls-Royce with Doug, and I went with a friend in the Auburn. And what fun it was. The most glamorous car for a lady to be driving in, as you can imagine. I was very pleased to hear that Doug also found parking hard, because parking that car where you have this incredibly wide rear and a terrible visibility, it was very, very stressful for me driving the car and trying to park it in the streets in France. And it's one thing I remember finding it very, very difficult. But also, it also brought to my memory the fact that I had to have a lot of cushions on the seats, because, you know, being shorter again than Doug, I remember taking a lot of cushions so that to try and raise me out of the seat so that I could see over the dash and see more clearly, particularly when you're trying to park. It's very, very difficult. So I remember going, my father and I've got a few photos I'll share with you about the rally. I'm going to try and share screen and see what happens. Okay, so this was the brochure for the rally. And it's a very embarrassing picture of us all in the Rolls in front of Palace House, the Rallye Mondiale FIFA, the Fédération Française de Véhicules L'Époque. So it was a very, very glamorous rally because it's had us on the front. And here is a picture of us at the rally. So here's Dad, there's the Alpine Eagle, and there's me in my very fancy flying gear hat, which is what I was wearing for the rally, because driving in the open top car is always quite challenging. Here I am in the Auburn, and you can see there's a bit of I think it was quite rainy, because obviously we've got the famous hood up there, and I think remember that it was quite rainy on the second day, and driving with those windscreen wipers that Doug was talking about in the rain in a car with sort of zero visibility, sitting on some cushions, you know, going along, is quite a stressful experience. Even Doug said it was. So for me, it was even worse. But what fun it was. It was a glamorous rally. We went from, as you can imagine, very nice hotels to hotel via chateau, where we had even more delicious wines. There's always a part of rallying with my dad that if you ever share a car with him and you're co-driving with him, there's one rule, and it's a very simple rule. It's that he always does the morning, because he always wants to have the full enjoyment of a large lunch with all the wines. So that I always had to take over the driving after lunch, which was quite annoying. And what he would then do is, just before you arrived at the, you know, the final destination where there'd be some triumphal arch with the mayor and everybody waiting for you, I'd have to pull over and he would then get back in the car and do the big entrance. So I was always driving, as I said, in the afternoons, which was quite annoying. And then he'd just fall asleep, usually in the car next to me, slump over. Doug will have happy memories of this. And then he'd wake up for the big thing at the end and arrive in style. Great memories of those days. So we did in the rally that I did in the Auburn, about 150 on here. Oh, that was Doug looking at the car here, just checking everything before we leave off on the journey. We did 120 kilometers on the first day, 102 on the second, and 170 on the third. As I said, it was from Saint-Malo we went and then drove through the lovely Loire Valley and then back onto the ferry. Dad, of course, flew back in a nice plane and I drove the car back on the ferry, as often is the case, and really good fun. Here's a picture of the rally, as again you can see, is a mixed marks cars. I'm not sure if my father there is polishing the bonnet, but he usually only did that when there was a camera around. Again, I think Doug would verify this, that as soon as there was a member of the press around, he'd say, Doug, get me a cloth, and he'd be then polishing the bonnet because he knew it was a great photo opportunity to be seen polishing the car, and it might make a big story. You see the Auburn there in the background. Such a beautiful car to be in on a rally. Oh, I'm trying to get another picture up. Hold on, let's see if we can make this work. There's another one. This is the car, I think, arriving somewhere where you can see it's been raining very hard. It's very wet on that bonnet, and there's a lot of leaves and things. I remember driving the car was actually not difficult to drive as such. It's heavy, but it has a powerful engine. And so long as you're just cruising, as we were in France on the roads there, it was a very pleasurable experience. Now look at Doug there. What a young man he was in those days with his handsome moustache. Of course, he doesn't look a day older, I will just quickly add. And here I am in the car before we head off again. But just to say that this car is a family car, is a special place for me, because having driven in that rally in the Auburn, and it's a car that I know Rafe particularly likes as well. It's regularly used, and I hope, you know, when it gets working again, we'll be able to take it out and use it again, because it is such a beautiful car. It's such a glamorous car. It's a pleasure to drive. It's not too difficult. And of course, having a working radio is incredible. It's the one thing I also remember is we did try and turn on the radio and tune in to the French radio stations. But I have to say, Doug also said that it does seem to affect the power of the lights and other things in the car, and the quality of the radio is pretty poor, I have to say, but it's still amazing to have a working 1930s original radio still working in the car. So, you know, what a fabulous car. And both of the Rolls, the Alpine Eagle and myself, we didn't have any problems in this rally. The cars both ran smoothly. I'm pleased to say, unlike some rallies I've been on with my father where we've broken down, it's not the first time I've been in a broken down car, as Doug will tell you. I seem to have a habit of breaking cars sometimes, but I always blame the engineers. It's never my fault. Must be something to do with them. But really, what a beautiful car it is. And thanks to Doug for telling us so much about it today. It was a really interesting talk. And I'm sure you'd all like to join me in thanking him for the talk and Rachel for doing the filming, and to thank you, the 100 Club members, for your support during this very difficult year, because it hasn't been easy for all of us. And evenings like this are a lot of fun to get together and to be able to share our love of motoring and of the cars in the National Motor Museum. And, you know, doing this when the doors are closed, it's a lot of fun. So to the 100 Club members, thank you very much for your support. And also to the friends who've also, some of you are in for this event today. Thank you for your support, because it all makes such a difference to know you're all out there and still keen to support us. So thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. Thank you to Russell for your excellent questions. If you've got any other questions, obviously send them in to Doug about the car. I'm sure he'd be delighted to talk to you about them. And perhaps when we get the car going again, hopefully in the later year, when it's all assembled again, we could perhaps hear the car running and hear it running, because that would be a fantastic thing for us to all hear that engine, experience the gearbox, and see it on a lovely summer's evening driving round the beautiful site at Beaulieu. So thank you very much also to Heather, who's done a great job at putting this evening together.
And thank you, Mary. I have to say, at the Beaulieu 100 event that we had on the Palace House lawns not last year, the year before, the members that got a chance to drive around it, it was the car of the day. It actually brought tears to quite a lot of the people that got into its eyes. They just thought it was the most fabulous vehicle. So yeah, we share your sentiments that it's a wonderful vehicle. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we hope we'll see you all soon for the next one, and all stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming along this evening. And thank you to Doug.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to end and say goodnight to everybody. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Any feedback, please email myself or Teresa, and we will put those comments into our newsletters and on our blog to everybody. Thank you. Good night. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Goodbye.